Joining me right now, GOP political strategist, co-founder of MustReadTexas.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Chad. Doing great. How about you?
Doing all right. Appreciate you joining us. Let's, I guess, start off by talking about big news for Republicans. Not surprising news for Republicans, but news for Republicans over the weekend as Mary Landrieu, she's out.
Yeah, that's right. Special election. Not a surprise. Margin was probably about what folks expected. I think it was something like 57-43. So 13-point margin, just under 60 for Bill Cassidy. Yeah, I mean, it puts Republicans at 54 seats in the United States Senate. It means they'll need six votes to get 60 to proceed to almost all legislation. And I think on some things like Keystone, they can do that. But, you know, the other storyline here, Chad, is just that, the plight of the Southern Democrats.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at just the old South, which I think technically excludes Virginia and Florida, if you look at all the Southern states, there is not one Democratic governor or U.S. senator. And that is a striking change from 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, I think even what Time Magazine said that there's not even a state house controlled by the Democrats in the southern states. Is that correct?
I believe that's right. Yeah, I mean they have, the reason that matters for two reasons. It matters, number one, because Democratic legislation will not be passing through the House and Senate at the state level, but it also matters because Democrats won't be building a bench. If you look at the kind of individuals who usually win the office of governor or senator or even congressman, they're usually state legislators. It's usually how they get their start. So if you're not building a bench, you're not going to have much of a future as a party.
Well, what is this, these results, what message does that send to the Democrats, or what message should it send to the National Democratic Party out there? Is it that they've gone too far to the left?
I think that's right. There's a lot of talk about how Republicans have moved too far to the right. If you watch, mainstream media coverage, that's all they talk about. But there's very little discussion of how far to the left the Democrats have moved. And, if you remember, Bill Clinton was a sort of third way, Democratic Leadership Council mainstream Democrat when he won the presidency in 1992. It's unthinkable that someone as moderate as him, I think, could be a national leader for the Democrats today. They do sort of cheap things, like they put Mark Warner on their leadership team, by creating a new position for him. But ultimately, the Democratic agenda is pretty far left. It's very far left on social issues. It's far left on the environment, on taxes, on regulation, on all the major issues. It's hard to even identify one issue where they are considered mainstream. They're certainly far left on the Second Amendment. So, moderates, sort of need not apply in the Democratic Party. I mean, you used to have a fairly robust number of fiscally conservative Democrats in the House that were called the Blue Dog Democrats. I mean, they basically don't exist anymore. There's probably less than 10 now, when at one time there were probably 50 or 60 of them in the House. So, yeah, I think this is a party that's increasingly controlled by, Upper West Side, very wealthy Democrats and liberals. And the party's moved very far to the left, and that's not where the country is. The country is in the middle. The country's, I think, on the center right, generally speaking. They are not on the far left where the Democratic Party is.
What do you think that says for Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren? Because Elizabeth Warren, as you know, she's being talked about more and more by more and more people now as a challenger to Hillary Clinton. What does this say about that potential race?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it says is that if you are a liberal candidate like Obama was and like Hillary is, you have to try to pretend you're not liberal, and you also have to try to get the voters swept up in your biography, so they're not paying attention to your liberal views. And I think a lot of Americans did get swept up in the historic nature of Barack Obama's candidacy, and to the same extent, you're going to see a lot of that on repeat with Hillary being the first woman. But I think on the other thing I'll just say though is, it's clear that Elizabeth Warren has struck a chord on some of the populism views that she has, and I think that does give her some appeal to a lower middle class voters. who feel like they don't have a fair shot. And so you're going to hear a lot about economic fairness and economic justice and, these kinds of issues, wage inequality, things like that from the Democrats. That's an issue where they feel like they can access, middle-class voters who feel like their wages haven't increased in the Obama years because they haven't.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Matt, you're quoted in the Hill today. They've got a piece out on 2016 and the timeline for 2016. As far as Republicans go, you brought up in the piece shadow boxing between Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. Is everyone just kind of waiting for each other here?
There's a little bit of that. I mean, look, everyone who's thinking of running has, one or two people out there that are kind of their challengers. And then there's, several others who are just broadly challengers to them. But there are specific threats. Each candidate has specific threats. I mean, for Ted Cruz, his threat is Rand Paul and probably someone like Mike Huckabee with social conservatives in Iowa. If you look at someone like Rick Perry, I think his threat is probably, some of these other governors like Bobby Jindal, or Scott Walker from Wisconsin. For Chris Christie, I think his threat is someone like Jeb Bush, in the establishment wing. So a little bit of this is that, no one wants to be the second person to announce within their own sort of category. They want to get in there first, but everybody has, their own issues. I mean, if Huckabee announces, his Fox News show comes to an end, that's a huge platform and it's probably a significant part of his earnings. A number of governors have legislative sessions they have to get through. They have to get budgets passed. I believe Chris Christie has a session, and Scott Walker certainly does. Mike Pence of Indiana does. I believe Jindal does. So a number of these governors have to get through, really to April or so before they make their decision. Perry has said he's probably likely to make his decision around April. Everyone has kind of their own considerations here. And while I think, there's kind of a little bit of pressure to get started and get going and make your announcement. And, I think there's really only a couple people who would likely announce early. I think Chris Christie might announce early to try to put pressure on Jeb not to run. I could see someone like Ted Cruz announcing early. But the other thing to keep in mind on the senators is, these governors have day jobs, but senators do too. And the Republican majority has announced they're going to have votes on Fridays in January when the new Congress takes over. Now, when you were in the minority, you could skip the cloture vote and essentially be voting with your feet and essentially be casting a no vote by not attending. But when you're in the majority and you have 54 Republicans, you got to get 6 Democrats to get 60 votes to move any legislation whatsoever. Every Republican is needed. So there's going to be some schedule difficulty for Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz if they all run for president, because they're going to be expected to be in the United States Senate voting on cloture motions Monday through Friday when the Senate's in session, and that's going to go on for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and as we've seen before, if they're missing votes, that will be used as ammunition by the governors who are running for president. There'll be probably quite a few of those who are out there running. Matt, what can people find this morning on mustreadtexas.com?
Yeah, starting to put some things out. There was a special election for the Texas Senate with Lois Kolkhorst replacing Glenn Hager on Saturday, so the Senate is now the Senate's membership is now pretty much set. Obviously, heading into the legislative session, lots of coverage of the speaker's race. I know Greg Abbott today has a transition press conference at 11:30 this morning. So all the news can be found at mustreadtexas.com.
All right, Matt, as always, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chad. Have a great week.
You too. That's Matt Mackowiak. Follow him on Twitter at Matt Mackowiak.